Hi everybody, and welcome to the Gymnastics Australia webinar series, the second part of physical preparation for young gymnasts. It's now time for me to introduce Dee Jennings. Many of you were here at the last webinar, so you'll know Dee from then. But for those who are not, Dee is a master coach in strength and conditioning. She's worked with many of Australia's elite sportsmen and women, including former Australian gymnastics representatives during her time at the AIS and the VIS. Dee is currently making an impact in gymnastics as the performance manager at GA's National Centre of Excellence in Melbourne. We're delighted that Dee is able to facilitate your learning and share her knowledge and ideas with you today. I will now hand over the controls to Dee. Bear with us a while whilst we do this, and enjoy today's webinar.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for dialing in and joining the session today. As Ada said, this is the second of the sessions that we're running on the development of physical attributes in young gymnasts. Just get the slides sorted out here. Can I see that screen? What we're going to go through today, and as a follow-on from the session that we ran a few weeks ago, is how to build your resilience in your gymnast. We'll look at general and specific exercises and the difference between and where you should start your athlete's journey along the physical preparation pathway. And we'll look at some programming, so how to actually put your program together. We'll look at what some specific aims and outcomes could be, how to set the order of the exercises to develop that specific aim, and then we'll delve into some sets and reps. As Adi mentioned, we'll look at some videos of different exercises as we go through the presentation. I'll try and give you as much sort of visual information as possible so you can see what we're currently doing with some of the NCE athletes, but also some easy exercises that you can put into your programs, as of tomorrow or this afternoon if you've got a session coming up. So the exercises that you'll see don't require that much equipment. Most of them are body weight exercises. We'll talk about why that is as we go through the presentation when we talk about general versus specific exercises, and we'll also look at how and where you can implement these exercises into your programming. I just wanted to start with a little bit of research. This is a study by Lawson in the British Journal of Sports Medicine in 2014. It's a review article, and they were looking at the best method to prevent and tolerate injury. So what they did is collated a lot of other research papers that had been previously done. They came up with a list of over 2,600 subjects, and they looked at the impact of strength training, stretching or proprioception exercises to protect against sports injuries. And they looked at both acute and chronic injuries. So what they discovered was there was really no benefit to stretching, and that through proprioception or strength training, and even a combination of both proprioception and strength training, they were able to actually look at how that impacted injury. So if we're just doing strength training, then we can reduce sports injuries to less than 1/3. So if you think about your gymnastics population in your gym and your training within your group, think about just the impact of reducing your injury load and the amount of injuries by 1/3. Okay, if we look at the overuse injuries, we can almost reduce them by 50%. Okay, just by introducing good quality strength training in a systematic, formulated way across the whole year of your program. So the impact that we can have by introducing this type of training into your program is can be never overrated. I found this quote by a colleague of mine, Dr. Jeremy Shepherd. He was with Surfing Australia at the time. He was their high performance manager. I'll just give you a moment just to have a read through. There's 2 slides, so just have a read through and you'll get the gist of what we mean when we introduce strength training program and how to build a resilient athlete. So obviously this is related to surfing, but it can be applicable across any sport. As I read it, I thought of gymnastics and the movements that are associated with what our gymnasts and what any gym sport athlete needs to be able to complete and do. So for me, this is the key area. They have to be able to move well, before they can even train. So we need to develop the physicality of our athletes before they can even develop any type of skill. So just on the second page here, I again just give you a moment to have a read through. And again, it's the stronger people get fewer injuries because weak things break. I mean, that really stood out for me as well. So the stronger and more robust we can make our athletes, I think the less things will break. It's pretty simple. And as Jeremy puts it really nicely, that's just physics. So what we want to try and build is resilient athletes, okay, that can do all the things that we spoke about in the last webinar. So they can run, jump, land, push, pull, they can hinge, and they can rotate and twist. Okay, they can do all that with no limitation from their physical capacity. So I think we've all come across athletes who are weak, so their strength is deficient, and they don't have the motor control or the ability to control their movement and coordinate those movements. So their neural pathway is quite underdeveloped, leading to an undesired outcome. So that can be shown in the form of pain or restriction or a lack of performance. So, and we'll show you some examples as we go through some of the videos, and you'll be able to see some of the athletes that we're currently working with that have a lack of strength and a lack of control. So this, in athlete A, is the worst type of combination that you can see. And a lot of our young athletes are exhibiting these type of patterns. Athlete B is quite strong. Okay, if you get her to perform, or he to perform a task of strength, might be a push-up or a pull-up or a chin-up or something like that, they can do that. But their ability to actually control that task might be limited. And again, we'll show some examples of athletes who can do a chin-up, who can do a push-up, but not very well, and they can't control the stability based around things like their scapular movement or their ability to control their spine under load. So it still produces an undesired outcome. Then we have the athletes that are really weak, but can control their movement. So they might be limited in terms of range, or they might be able to do 1 or 2 movements but not facilitate 10 or 15. Or when they get to the end of the routine, you know, their lack of strength dominates their ability to control and tolerate through their neural system. Obviously, we want athlete D, who's strong and can actually control what they're doing in space and time. And they can actually then be robust enough to perform the tasks that you're asking them to do time and time and time again. So by the time they get to the end of the week and they're coming through their last routine on their Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon training session, they can actually still do what you want them to do without losing this motor control or this strength. This is an example of a netball that I used to work with at the VIS. She's doing a simple drop-down task. So we asked her to step on from the bench, so it was a double leg takeoff to a single leg landing. Kind of similar to what we're asking some of the gym sport athletes to do. Okay, so you can see what's happening with this athlete here and the poor loading pattern that she has at the moment. So now think about if we add speed of movement, we ask her to do it countable, an increased number of times, so repeat that over a series of jumps, lands, training sessions, weekly sessions over a year and over the volume of her career, and see the potential for injury that we have within this athlete. And then we ask her to do it with load. So we put a bar across her back just to try and get her stronger without the appropriate movement pattern. So what do we see? Malalignment of the hip, an internal rotation of the knee, and an unlocking of that foot, so pronation in that movement. So every time this athlete jumps and lands, this is the pattern that she's falling into. Okay, we need to modify and change this movement pattern as we go through her training program, or we're going to cause a lot of inefficiencies in her movement, which could potentially lead to injury. I won't say it's going to certainly lead to an injury, but in terms of her ability to increase running speed, have the potential to absorb landing, and have the potential to promote force in any jumping activity. So if this athlete's then doing, say, a split leap off one leg, then her ability to promote force and get herself into and off the ground is going to be compromised just by an inappropriate movement pattern. So if we're developing a physically resilient athlete, then we have to look at how this athlete is actually moving. So we need to look at, okay, what do the athletes have to do and can they actually do that with their physical capacities at the moment. If they can't, then we need to intervene. So we need to eradicate the movement error first, and that should be the premise of all movement programs or all physical preparation programs at the start. I'm just going to have a sip of water so that I don't get any strife halfway through the lecture today. So let's have a look at our first example of our first video. So we talk about eradicating movement patterns, and I'll play this a couple of times so you can see. Apologies for the quality of the video that might come up off the screen. I had to be quick to capture what was going on in this athlete. So this is an athlete who's done a lot of chin-ups in her time. Okay, I'll play that again. Okay, you can see the pattern that she's using to get herself up onto those chin-up bars. Okay, not a very pretty sight, and if you think about the inability of her scapulars to actually stay in the right place at the right time and pull in the right way, then she's quite limited in the way that she's doing this exercise. Now she would have done this is an IL-10 gymnast, so she would have done this over and over and over again. And if we look at what we spoke about in the previous slide, adding external load, so her body weight, adding speed, and this is part of some of the testing that's being done at the moment. So how many chin-ups can you do in a certain amount of time? We're just reinforcing this poor patterning all the time. So at some stage we've actually got to break the cycle and actually get her to actually do a little bit more work to control the stability through her shoulder blades so that she can actually do this movement in a more controlled and move more effectively and efficiently. So we'll just go to the first example of some of the exercises that we've been doing to develop some of these things, and we'll focus on some of the landing exercises that we've been working on in some of the NCE athletes. So the first is an athlete that has just come into the program. She's been doing a lot of double leg exercises, but we just needed to determine her movement patterns on a single leg movement. So double leg, she looked pretty good. She was able to keep knees over toes. She was able to get into a semi-decent range without being sort of instructed and told what to do. So in terms of her motor coordination and movement, she was actually okay. But then we looked at a little bit more deeper into her single leg activities, and I'll just let this one play through, and you can see now just focusing on what's happening at the hip level, what's happening with her knee, and what's happening down at her ankle. So we move from a more static to a more dynamic pattern, and again, now we're looking at how she controls her movement. Stop that for a second. So if we go back to our slides, a couple of slides back, and we look at the strength versus motor control of this athlete. She's a very fine athlete. You can see by the knobbly knees, she doesn't have a lot of muscle mass, so she hasn't got a great deal of strength. I think we're having a little bit of trouble with maybe the viewing of this video. We'll just
you can see it.
We'll just keep talking through.
Be good now? There's a delay.
So what we're saying now is this athlete having low strength and also low ability to actually control what she's actually doing in time and space. So her landing pattern, which we spoke about last week or in a couple of previous weeks, needs to be refined, and we also need to look at how we're going to strengthen and change this motor pattern. So if we continue to watch, you can see what's going on. So landing with a straight leg, and this is even more accentuated when we do our single leg step down movement. So again, just watching the knee over the toe position, knee, hip, ankle, and her ability to control landing on a single leg. So then we need to compare it to the other side to get a good comparison of what she's doing. So again, you can just see the alignment of when this athlete's landing on the floor. And it almost goes back to the still that we had of our netballer coming off that single leg box. So if this is repeated and repeated and repeated without any intervention, you can see what's going to happen over time. Poor loading patterns, lack of strength, we're putting the athlete into a compromised position. So how do we fix this? We'll go to some exercises. So these exercises can be done pretty simply in any gym. you'll see that they don't have or don't require much equipment. I do these in front of the mirror so that the athlete can see the alignment of hip, knee and foot. So this is just a really easy, simple exercise, a single leg balance exercise. We can then add variations to it. We've just got this athlete standing on just a blue cushion, and you can use anything really. You can use a pillow, you can use a cushion at home. We can add things like eyes closed, we can add in leg swings. This exercise here is a single leg exercise with a TheraBand as a bit more resistance, but it's not a heavy resistance band. It's just a light band just around the knee. We're still maintaining what we call good alignment. So what we're after is squareness through the hips, hip, knee and ankle all in one line, foot facing forward. So the foot's not externally rotated, it's actually facing in a nice forward neutral position. So the athlete's working just against the resistance. Then we can add things like just a little quarter squat. And again, we just want to make sure that those hips stay nice and square. So it's just adding another variable in. We can do with arms forward and just try and get a little bit more depth. But we're always looking at good postures and control in the movement. So we're not moving from exercise to exercise until the athlete can master what she's actually doing. Just from a side-on view, what we're looking at here is just your shoulders forward of your hips just a little bit. So we're not getting into that straight back position when you're actually squatting. So your shoulders have to actually come forward of your hips. Your knee comes forward of your toe and your hips drop into a seated position. So a good teaching point for this one would be sit back like you're sitting back on a chair. We can also add a Swiss ball into the next exercise group. So instead of having a band, we use a ball against the wall. So the athlete's pressing the ball hard with her right leg while she's squatting down and controlling on her left leg. So this adds a little bit more control and stability into the exercise. Stop there. And adds a couple of different variations that we can do. So you can see as we move and progress through each of the exercises that the teaching points are exactly the same. Knee over toe, hips stay square, chest stays upright, shoulders are back, eyes forward, chin up. Nice flat neutral back position, and it's the premise to develop our single leg squat, which is really the exercise for me that encompasses your ability to control load through a single leg, your ability to control your trunk over your hip, and control also your hip musculature in a standard standing position. So if we're running, jumping, landing, or taking off, then a single leg squat position and a good single leg squat range is really important. I usually add in a box for when the athlete's doing a single leg squat so that they have something as a reference point for them to actually sit back onto. Just hold it there at the bottom if you can capture one. Yep. Okay, with this exercise, again, this is one of the advanced exercises that we've worked through in terms of progression. Just hold it there. We're having a bit of trouble pausing right on the exact movement for Miranda to get down to the box. But you can see that this is an advanced exercise. She's got a 5 kilo weight in front of her. So we can actually now start to load the patterning once the patterning is very, very sound. So Miranda's doing this in front of the mirror so she can watch her hip, knee and ankle in line. She can also push the weight away from her to act as a counterbalance and incorporate a little bit more glute activation and activity through there. For this athlete, she's progressed all the way through all of the exercises that you've just seen through that little video clip. And for our case study, our first gymnast that we looked at in terms of her alignment, which was quite poor, she'll go through the same sort of systematic process. So she's not moving from exercise to exercise just for the sake of adding variety and for her not to get bored. She's actually making sure that she's competent in each exercise before we add things like a TheraBand or a balance cushion, or in Miranda's case here, a dumbbell for load. Okay, so that's pretty important. Again, we're not loading poor patterns at any stage. We're making sure the pattern is robust enough to tolerate the weight of the athlete, so her body weight, and also the amount of fatigue that they're putting through that athlete. So can the athlete do 10 to 15 repetitions of that exercise? Perfectly. If they can do 3 sets of that, then we move on and we add a little bit of load or a little bit of external resistance in the form of, as Miranda's doing here, a dumbbell, or as the other examples that we had with the TheraBand. So I just want to reiterate. So we're looking at the function of the athlete before we develop force, speed, or increase the volume of what we're doing. So we'll talk about how we do the volume of training with the sets and repetitions later in the presentation, but just wanted to make that point. We're looking at the function of the athlete. And I know you guys are really good at developing the skill and progressing the skill. These exercises are absolutely no different and require the same amount of attention to detail that you would do if you were developing a skill on bars, beam, floor, or any of the other acrobatic sports. When we move into general versus specific exercises, we showed this slide in the last presentation as well. So for our elite athletes right at the top of the pyramid up here, they've got a wide variety of exercises that they can do. They can be much, much more specific in the way that we design and implement our programs. So we can be really, really creative with what this level of athlete are able to do in their physical development program. So we can muck around with things like load. We can prescribe a percentage of their relative strength. We can look at developing and playing around with things like rest periods. We can undulate their periodization. We can do some contrast training where they do a heavy load and then a dynamic activity to promote and develop power. Down this end of the spectrum though, unless they've got the function and form, then there's no point accelerating that athlete to be up and do specific based exercises. So now think of some of the exercises that we get our athletes to do down this area to mimic what our elite athletes are doing at the top end. I can think of a couple just off the top of my head. Okay, things like national team warm-up. Are the athletes at this level ready to do some of the exercises that our national squad athletes do? And 9 times out of 10, they're probably not. We need to develop our non-specific exercise capacity of our developing athletes. Okay, so that means getting their movements and their movement quality spot on before we actually move up the continuum of the exercises from general and specific. So the more we can develop the athlete's capacity, and just a reminder, I'll just slip slide. So we're talking about the athlete's capacities, and we spoke about this in the last presentation. So we're talking now about developing their strength. We want to look at their movement skills. Are they balanced left and right, and do they have the flexibility and range through each of the muscle groups and also through the joints that you require in any of the skills that you're promoting and developing in your athletes? Do they have the muscular endurance associated to do what we need? Can they run fast? Can they jump and land with their agility? So do they have all of these different capacities? Now I've got to go back into the... Okay, there we go. So we don't want to reach the specific area of our athlete development too fast. There's too much that we can develop down at this end before we advance our athletes. On this one and this continuum, if we look at our training age all the way through our development pathway, so if we're looking at early childhood all the way through to our late adolescence, this graph focuses on the development of speed, but it's applicable across lots of different forums. So it could be movement, it could be strength, it could be skill development. What we're looking at primarily is our neural adaptations, so our motor control. Okay, when the athlete masters this area, then we can look at our combined structural and neural adaptations. So looking at how we develop specific strength, how we look at then things like hypertrophy, and how we coordinate all of these different things into some high-level plyometrics and complex training. But for now, we want to focus on this area here. So we're looking at the development of our fundamental movement skills, and we spent a bit of time talking about what they are in terms of a gymnastics sense. For me, it's about this one, developing physical literacy, and then coupling that with low-level strength training. We saw some exercises on the last video that help develop literacy. So what, again, we're looking at is your ability to run, jump, land, promote force, and also absorb force. So can they land and jump well? Before then, we start loading them through the continuum of their development. This is where we should be focusing our activities in our elite athletes. But unless they've got this foundation, we'll always have to sort of delve back and correct deficiencies that haven't been eradicated in their early stage development. So before we start loading our athletes, and these are some clips just from our national testing that we did late last year. So before we start sort of generating force and using exercises like a loaded squat and a loaded chin-up, these sort of athletes that I'm currently working with are like baby giraffes. They don't have the coordination and ability to actually control their own limbs, to do single leg activities, whether it's a jump land, and we saw some examples of that. So we've got to treat these athletes very, very differently. Our young developing athlete, we want to concentrate on developing those motor skills. Okay, we want to then build capacity. So are these motor skills tolerant of fatigue? So do they hold their correct technique when we ask the athlete to repeat and repeat and repeat these movements? If your athletes are anything like the ones that I'm working with, they want to know how many. How many do I have to do? And then they do 3 or 4 more just to beat the person next to them. I'm trying to change that mindset by looking and focusing on their technique. So get their heads around and educate the athlete at a young age that I don't care how many you do, I just want to know how many that you did really well. Okay, and I'll get them to describe back to me what really well looks like. Knee over toe, hips nice and square. And then they can start looking at each other and going, and not comparing and not making it a competition, but actually educating each other on what we're actually looking for in their skill development. And that's really helped with the buy-in that we're getting from the athletes in their physical development programs. So then it comes down to exercise selection. We'll talk about some program variables in a minute. So which exercises do you choose when? So when we look at general versus specific in terms of exercises, then we really wanted, for our younger developing athletes, spend a lot of time in this area of the exercise continuum. So we saw our elite athletes or our elite gymnasts spending a bit more time down this end of the spectrum. So we're looking at development of maximal strength, we're looking at the speed of movement, and we're looking at how they develop power. For our younger developing athletes, we're looking at how they activate their muscles and are they activating them in the right sequence. We look at can they balance and control their body on one leg, one arm, and can they actually coordinate their sequence of joints to create and promote a good quality movement. Do they have the range of movement to get down into a good quality range of squat? We'll see some examples of some of the struggles that some of the athletes are currently having, and these are young athletes. They're sort of 7 to 9-year-olds. So now think about if we don't fix their limitations now, by the time they get to the elite athlete end, they won't be able to do what we saw in the pictures. They won't be able to do a good quality squat under load because they'll always be compromised by things like range of movement. Rather than remedial, we can think of them as prehab. And prehab exercises or injury prevention exercises, however you want to label them, lead then to these performance enhancement exercises. So where do we start? We've got all of these exercises in our heads. They're all sort of sitting below us. What do we actually do and how do we put our programs together? So we need our programs to be individualised because each athlete within your group, each athlete within your group requires different programs to enable them to progress because each athlete will have a different way of doing things, a different way of exploring exercise and a different way of exhibiting any type of power or form. You watch your athletes jump and land, they'll do it differently. Watch your athletes throw and catch, you probably won't see that as much as in other sports, but they'll do it differently. What we need to do is not make them robots, but also find a good pathway for each athlete, which needs to be individualised, systematic and progressive. So we need to then look at how we develop our programs to exhibit those qualities. So an example that we had in our video was our single leg balance example. Single leg balance, add a leg swing, add an unstable environment, add a little bit of resistance in the form of a TheraBand, add a little bit of load in terms of a dumbbell, add a little bit of depth in terms of the box behind them. So that's a really easy way to progress a single leg exercise. What I see in a lot of gymnastics and I hear a lot of coaches sort of speaking about is shaping. And I asked one of the coaches, what is shaping? Why do you do it? And the answer was to develop strength in the shape that you're training, okay, to have sport-specific and relevant postures. Thanks, Michelle, for that quote. So what we're looking at in shaping is, and what I saw was a lot of these sort of body postures. So if I look at that, I say that's inefficient. The gymnastics coach will look at that and say that's sport specific. But for a young athlete, they need to be able to move through both continuums of this movement. So they need to be able to hold shape in the shape that the coaches want, and the coach, the shapes that you guys are promoting through exercise and skills. But they also need to be able to have good control over things like scapular control, thoracic extension rather than thoracic flexion, be able to maintain lumbar spine shape, and also be able to maintain what strength and conditioning coaches call a good postures. So I'll pick on the chin up again. So this is an example I would think of a very general gymnastics exercise. So I'll just let this play. You can see what we're talking about in the way that each athlete goes about the same exercise. Okay, lots of variation and versions there. Okay, let's have another go. Okay, so you can see that the girl with her legs strapped probably isn't as strong, but she wants to get through the reps, so she continues to go. Now, just have a look at the thoracic extension that's created by doing this exercise against wall bars. Okay, so I would say that this is a sport-specific exercise, but it's not a movement efficient exercise. So we're forcing this athlete into thoracic extension through her spine, and compromising and making her hinge through her lumbar spine there, just so she can get up with her chin up over the bar. As she gets her chin over the bar, this athlete here changes her shape and posture because she's tired and fatigued and can't do as many good ones. I'd say good ones in quotation marks. So she hovers at the top in this posture and position. Okay, so when we're doing our exercises and when we're doing our sport-specific exercises, let's be a bit smarter with what we're doing. So a simple chin-up exercise, and we'll talk about some chin-ups and even some corrective exercises as we go through. So this is what I see a lot of, the shaping exercises in the gym. And I often query the coaches as to why they're doing these exercises and the relevance of them. So are they specific, and are they actually doing anything? And again, I'm happy to hear from any of you as we go through and have the question times at the end of the presentation. So the shaping exercises are really static exercises with a little bit of movement, so isometric exercises. For specific positions, so disc-shaped, and forcing the athlete into holding and moving through positions. Okay, we've spoken about our round back push-up, and I see a lot of round back push-ups that the athletes are going through. Just pause. So you can see in this exercise, find the right pointer. In this exercise, we can still see the rounded back. Now watch what happens to the head position as the athlete goes through the movement. Oh, we've missed and moved on to a good one. Let's see if we can replay that a little bit. Okay, so when you're watching the push-up position, just what happens to her chin and what happens to the spine shape. So in an endeavour and an attempt to get her head to the floor or go as low as possible, she's just dropping her head to the floor. So there's no actual range that the athlete goes through. Okay, you can also see what happens to the scapulars as well. So usually we want scapular retraction and also a little bit of elevation. With this exercise here, what we're trying to do is promote some more control through the stability through the athlete's spine shape. So can the athlete hold a good posture, and can we get the scapula moving across the rib cage in a functional manner? So you can still do the push-up with elbows into the side. You can still do the push-ups with elbows at right angles. But we're just trying to create strength through range and her ability to promote and hold good postures all the way through the activity. So good thoracic extension, a lumbar spine that's in a neutral position, and good range. So I often put a ball or some sort of spiky ball that they've got to put their chest down toward, just to make sure that they're going to the right depth. Saying chest to the ground really doesn't, in my experience, work that well. But if they're going down to something like a tennis ball or a spiky ball that they've got to touch their chest onto, gets to the relevant and range that we want. This exercise here I think is a really good one. It's a crawling exercise. Again, we want to try and maintain good thoracic extension and a little bit of neutral spine all the way through. We've been starting to do a little bit more of these sort of exercises to promote a little bit more movement through the activity. They'd do a 4-point kneel movement with arm-leg extension before they'd go into something like a crawling activity. But again, we're looking at exactly the same things. Good spine shape, knees just off the floor, and it's the smoothness of movement. So we're trying to get away from a jerky one arm, one leg movement to something that they've been doing or should have been doing, in their infant state, and returning to that sort of stability control. So other exercises that you can do for athletes that are compromised in their upper body and also in their thoracic are things like this exercise, so a front support or a Swiss ball walkout. Again, we're looking for exactly the same things as we were in our crawling exercise. So good control through upper spine, lower spine, promoting a little bit of movement and a little bit of resistance, and can they tolerate the load of their own body. This is the 4-point kneel exercise. Ellie's doing it with opposite arm and leg, and she's doing it on a foam roller just to make it a little bit harder for her. So the foam roller adds a little bit of unstable environment to the athlete and to the exercise, but again we're looking for exactly the same shapes and exactly the same level of control all the way through these different exercises. So whether it's a push-up, whether it's a walkout, a crawling exercise, the reinforcement of the same movements and the same shapes throughout. Another example of a really good exercise, this one's not done that well. Again, just take note of the upper thoracic position, so basically where Edie's hood is. So for sort of correcting this exercise, then we'd say long chest, look up, chin up, and just to get a little bit more upper thoracic extension. Okay, another exercise that you can add into your programs. You might already be doing these, but again, just a couple of teaching points on them. What we're focusing on is the upper back position. So hopefully you can see the difference. All I'm doing is reminding the athlete to maintain control through her spine shape. So the dominant position is the rounded back position, but we want to try and get the athlete strong through range. So her ability to hold neutral spine, but also her ability to promote and hold a sport-specific position in that shape. So we need the athlete to be able to do both. So you can see the position that she's struggling to maintain and hold is unfamiliar, but it's the position that we're wanting the athlete to move through. Another exercise that's really common is the back extension exercise. Again, we want to try and promote exactly the same as we've spoken through in the other exercises. So all I'm doing is just reminding the athlete to be nice and strong and flat, engage through her lower trapezius muscles, but also in this shape, her ability to engage through hamstrings and glutes is much better just by changing the shape of her spine. So it's just a reminder of what the athlete's actually working towards. We want a nice straight shape, just horizontal. Sport-specific version of this, or an advanced version, would be to add a little bit of load or add arms into the movement. We spoke about the progression of our chin-up exercise, and this is one of the girls doing our wall bar chin-ups again. I see a lot of wall bar chin-ups. I also see a lot of chin-ups with a swing at the bottom, which aren't really doing a whole lot until the athlete gets up to right angles with her elbows. My preference is that the athlete does control the movement all the way through. So her hands are a little bit wider. Again, we're building capacity. We're not building a sport-specific exercise at this age group. So the athlete, there's no swing. The athlete is away from the wall bar, so she can actually move her body in a straight line. Okay, ideally we want the elbows out to the side, and again that's a more advanced exercise. Okay, but the athlete's doing what I would consider quite a good job on this particular exercise. So it can be done, you've just got to be diligent on reminding your athletes of the technique that they need when they're doing the exercises that you want them to do. So let's look at some training variables. So some specific variables. So volume, how many? Frequency, how often? And intensity, how hard? So where do you start your program? Well, it really depends on what the outcome is. So we need to determine the aim of the program. So is it to develop good quality lower body movement? Is it to develop some upper body strength using some good quality exercises that we've shown you in some of the videos and presentation? This is just a general sets and reps page. So for me, in our level of gymnasts, and I'm talking about the sort of IL6 to IL10s even, with a low training age and a low training history, and we're looking at 8 to 10 or 8 to 15 reps, a light load, usually their body weight, 2 to 3 sets, and this will be time dependent. So at the moment I've got about 40 minutes, so I can fit in around 8 exercises with our lower level gymnasts. We do 2 to 3, we try and get 3 sets of about 8 exercises within the program. We're on the upper end at the moment. We started doing sort of repetitions and sets around 8 reps, and we've built out to about 15 because they can now control their positions with a higher rep range. We've added a little bit of load, not too much. It's a very controlled speed. It's done. Most of the exercises are done in front of the mirror, and we have a short to medium rest period. So it's not a circuit. It's good quality movement in a coordinated manner. For our next group, our what we call group 3 and 4, we've moved more into a little bit more general strength. This can probably go out to 12, 13, 14 reps. Okay, we don't really delve into the lower rep ranges, but we're starting to add a little bit more quality load. Our movement is still controlled. We haven't ventured into fast movements except for things like jumps and box jumps and that sort of stuff. And then we prescribe, again, our rest periods. For our senior athletes, we're moving more down into a maximal strength and power development, but we're still delving and we're still having to delve back into our beginner exercises because of some of the limitations that they're carrying through their journey. We'll just look at some sample programs as we go through. Just bear with me while I bring these ones up. So these are just 3 programs that we've done through our group 3 and 4, so IL8s to IL10s, IL8s to 10s. Excuse me. The order of the exercise, I like to go upper body then lower body and use the exercises as pairings. We have a number of athletes within our group, so usually the athletes would work down the page in terms of the exercises. So they start with multi-joint exercises, whole body exercises, complex exercises to start, and then move down into some more stability-based exercises to finish off with. Because we've got a high volume of girls within the gym, some of the girls start within the 3rd pairing, so they'll start on the pull-ups and aerobics balance, for example, and then work their way back down through the list of exercises. Not ideal, but we need to make some compromises just because of the volume of girls that we've got. So just talk through some of the exercises. We'll show some clips at the end so you can see some of the different things that we're doing with the girls. So chin-ups, as you would have seen in the video, very strict, full hang on their chin-up, pause at the bottom, no leg swing, chin over the bar. They could do 15, 20 chin-ups with a swing. They could do probably 10, 15 chin-ups on the wall bar, but when we actually make them pause at the bottom, have really good control, then they were struggling to do 8 good ones, what I would consider good technique exercises. And now they're starting to pick each other up on no leg swing, your chin has to go over the bar, you have to pause at the bottom and be really meticulous on what we're doing. Similar with their single leg squats, all these, as I said, are done in front of the mirror. They can do 10, but we're looking at depth and we're looking at control. Okay, so those are the 2 important variables. This one is a dumbbell single arm, single leg press. It's a low load exercise. We're looking at sort of 7-8 kilos in total. They stand on, say, for example, their left leg and they push with their right hand. So we're trying to get left hip, right shoulder coordinated. OH is just overhead. So we're looking at an overhead walking lunge to stretch out their shoulders and thoracic and see what happens with changing the dynamic movement of their upper and lower bodies. The pull-ups, we've got a clip of those coming up. We do those with their feet on the box and just to reinforce a good body shape and some upper body stability exercises as well. An arabesque balance is just a glute exercise to promote some activation and some good stability in the shapes that we actually want. The Swiss ball walkouts you've seen and the single leg calf raises we just do off a 45-degree ledge as well. If we look how that contrasts to the next program, okay, our time was shortened a little bit. This is week 1 of program 2, so we spend probably 4 to 6 weeks on each program. I've got the athletes for a Tuesday and a Thursday time slot. The time varies depending on how the coaches and the rotations go. So ideally, if I can get 45 minutes, then that would be more advantageous. It's stretching now down because we're coming into the competition time to about 30 minutes. So we're having to refine what the athletes are doing. You'll see that there's a decreased number of exercises in here. But again, this is week 1. We're out to on this program, we finished with 4 sets of 8 exercises. So still trying to fit in a good amount of good quality work. So push-ups, like you saw in the example, lunges we've looked at off a step just to provide a little bit of different sort of stimulus. Single arm dumbbell row, again just looking at loading that spine and getting a little bit more sort of strength around at that scapula. We've moved from an overhead forward lunge to a forward and backward lunge with a balance in the middle as well. Change from a single arm press to a double arm press, adding a little bit more load. A single leg glute exercise, moving on from our arabesque. So we're progressing each exercise as we go along. When we come down to our third progression, and some of these exercises that you've seen in some of the clips. So our crawling, our lateral hop and hold over the foam, back and forward. Our Swiss ball pike exercise, we're doing a landing from the box, similar to what we've had in some of the examples. We've progressed our overhead forward and backward lunge to a walking lunge with rotation, so added a little bit of load into that movement. We've still got our single arm shoulder press exercise, but now we're doing it standing. We can add a little bit more load because they're on 2 legs. We're taking the balance component out. We're adding a little bit more load into our dumbbell squat exercise. You'll see the foam roller exercise in the next clip as we go through. We're still continuing on developing our single leg squats because they're not nearly to a level or depth that is required at the moment. We've added in some back extension exercises as well and developing our more specific stability exercises as we go. So we might just view some of the exercises in one of the last video clips that we've got coming up. Okay, so these are just some exercises, and you'll see from the names of the exercises, most of them have come from these programs, just to give you a visual idea of where we're heading and what we're trying to do. So again, it's just about trying to maintain our function, give the athletes the opportunity to correct any postural deviations that they've got. With our lower level athletes, we've just incorporated some really basic sort of fun exercises. So single leg balance exercises, just with some foam cubes and foam blocks. So side to side throws, chest passes, overhead throws and catches. They're pretty not very good at them. They like it because it's different and fun. We do these exercises off a beam as well. We can change what they're doing. This exercise is just a really simple kick from the knee. But again, we're just moving toward quality movements through full range. So can they do things like the exercises and movements that we've spoken about? This is our single leg lateral hop and hold. So again, just over a cube. If they land on it, it doesn't matter. It's not going to wreck their ankles. It's nothing solid. So you can see some of the limitations that we've still got, we're still working on and still developing. So overhead squats is just a continuation from our bodyweight squats, dumbbell squats. We're adding in now some exercises that compromise the athlete. So putting their arms above their head, seeing what happens to their thoracic positioning. Okay, this is our pull-up on the rings, and it's just another different plane to do some really good control through some upper body and scapular positioning. Adding a little bit of load to a squat that has really good range. We do some lateral lunges. Okay, again, we're looking for the same principles: hip, knee, ankle alignment. Again, these are all done in front of the mirror so the athlete can watch themselves doing it. So with this exercise, you can see what happens when the athlete, can you just rewind that one? See what happens when the athlete puts their hands above their head. Increase in that thoracic arching position. So the teaching point here would be elbows by your ears. So she wants to actually move that stick back just a little bit, but you can see what happens. Just keep it playing for a sec and then pause on the next one. You can see what happens when we actually then get into the right position with the upper body, the lower body is compromised. And she's probably got her feet a little bit too wide there as well. But again, just by changing the form of the exercise without adding too much load, she's got a piece of dowel in her hand, it doesn't weigh too much at all, we can compromise the athlete and challenge the athlete in a different way. Just some really easy side holds where the athlete has to work against their own resistance. Saraband side-to-side exercises are really great at developing some hip control as well. So we'll get our younger athletes to do a lot of Saraband exercises just to add a little bit of resistance. We can do upper body versions, lower body versions as well. With our more senior athletes, so our IL-10 junior internationals, we can start adding a little bit more load. We want to go through full range of the exercises as well. So Miranda's got a 5 kilo plate there doing a full range Swiss ball. And she's doing now, a more advanced exercise. We've been working hard on the jump land techniques. So taking out that hip hinge movement that dominates some of the gymnast movement patterns and just getting a nice smooth jumping action. Okay, we'll just switch back to the presentation. Just a couple more slides to finish up on. So just some keys when you're looking at the program design. You want to think before you write. So what is the objective of your program? Before you even select any exercises, reps, sets and ranges, what is the aim of what you're trying to achieve? We want to look at movement over muscle. So each of your exercises needs to have an aim. Skill before workload. So before we add load, before we add number of sets or intensity or how many times, can they actually do the movement of good quality? And this is our continuum. Developing stability, developing strength, and then adding speed. For me, it's the last one, and this is one that was drilled into me when I came through strength and conditioning programs by my mentors, process over randomness. So have a plan in place for what you want to do and how you want to develop your athletes. Always plan, and that's session by session. Make changes as you go. It might just be to what that athlete does on that day or the exercise and how that individual athlete's performing that exercise in terms of whether they can tolerate what you're actually giving them. So they might do less or they might do more, they might do a different range, they might do single arm or a slightly different version. But it's how you put together your program and how you design your program that prevents this randomness as you go through. So what's the aim of your program? How do you put your program together? When do you change it? And how do you go through in terms of developing your athletes physically?
Dee, we do have a question. What do we do when the demands of the sport are greater than the physical readiness of the athlete?
That's a really good question, and it's probably something that we come up against in a lot of different sports, gymnastics as well. We need to develop our athletes early. We need to try and, if they're not developed in terms of the physical capacities of what you need them to do, then we're always going to play catch up. But you have to provide your athletes with the physical skills to be able to tolerate the load and also tolerate the technical requirements of the sport. Sometimes you'll play catch up, sometimes you'll be in front. In terms of, just read the question again.
What do we do when the demands of the sport are greater than the physical?
Yeah, the physical readiness of the athlete. I would say challenge your athlete and make them physically ready for what they're actually doing. And that might require a rejigging of what the athletes are doing. It needs to go the other way, I think. And prioritising, are the athletes actually physically ready to do what you want them to do? So it might be one step back to take two steps forward. So the physical development of your athletes is paramount. If you advance your skill development before they're physically ready, that's when you get into a little bit of trouble in regard to the accelerated movements and potential for injury, because you're overloading the athlete in a way that they're not ready to do. So it might be taking the time to actually develop them physically for what you want them to do. Do you have any other questions there?
I don't think we've got any others typed in. Yeah, we answered that one. Oh, how do we create a physical testing program which can specifically test the movement quality?
Just let me read that question again.
How can we create a testing program that can test the movement quality?
There's probably a number of different ways that you can do that. You can use movement screening tests as physical competency tests. So rather than how many the athlete can do, so if you're looking at, for example, a chin-up, can the athlete do 5 good quality chin-ups, or can the athlete do 10 good quality chin-ups, rather than how many chin-ups can that athlete do in 20 seconds. So for mine, once the athlete can achieve a competency in an exercise, we then need to move them to the next level. So it's about then creating the level of competencies that your athletes go through. So can they do a single leg squat? And can they hold and maintain positions? And we can even rate them on their ability to do that. It might just be as simple as rating them out of 1 to 5, 5 being the optimal depth, range and position, 1 being they're poor, they can't hold shape, they can't stand on one leg. And then the continuum through that would be then how we rate that gymnast on their ability to hold a position or do that functional exercise. So you can come up with a battery of different movement tests and test the athlete through that battery. I think we need to develop different levels of tests for different levels of athlete, so that we get a physical literacy and a physical competency all the way through the physical sort of development of that athlete. So our basic level athletes might do something very, very different to our senior athletes, who are then doing more loaded exercises and looking at developing maximal strength. So we saw a photo of Emily Little doing a 3RM squat exercise. Now there's no need for our IL-8s to do that exercise, but they might do an overhead bodyweight squat. And can they hold position and shape? And that, yes, competency, yes. Add a little bit of load, competent, no. What breaks down? And that should direct our programs now, our physical or our individualised programs.
We've got Michelle who's asked another question, Dee. Would you prefer or recommend a longer session, such as 60 minutes, twice a week, or a shorter session, which is 30 minutes, but each training period?
Good question, and I think you can mix it around a little bit more. Again, it probably comes back to how much or what the aims of your session are and how much you can pack into. Also, the training age of your athletes. If your athletes are younger, then I'd go for a little bit more often, so that you're reinforcing those shapes and techniques and teaching points, at every opportunity. The more advanced your athletes are, then I'd go for the twice, 2 times 60-minute sessions. But if you're younger athletes, then I'd probably go for your 30-minute time blocks.
Do we have any other questions for anyone else online? No, I think that's it.
Okay, well, we're going to finish there. I'd like to thank Dee for the wonderful and insightful presentation today. And I'm sure that you will all go away today with lots of ideas to implement in the gym. So we thank you very much, Dee, for coming in and spending the hour with us. And to you, our audience, thank you for joining us. At Gymnastics Australia, we're always looking to continually improve on what we do, so we'd really appreciate your feedback, and you will be sent the link to provide feedback on the presentation today, and you'll also be sent the link of the recording of today's webinar. So thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.